how'd you get into working at the radio station? You started as an intern,
Yes,
right?
in 1990, I went to a vocational school, National Broadcasting School, and they were having a TV campaign saying they were giving out scholarships. Come and audition. And I went to audition, and they said, "Well, we got good news, bad news. Bad news is you didn't win the scholarship. But the good news is, if you sign this paper, there's this thing called a Pell Grant. The government will pay $3,000, and you pay $3,000, and for $6,000, we'll make you a radio star." Which
Wow.
$6,000 in 1989 was pretty significant
Yeah,
chunk
yeah.
of change. So I was working at a little coffee shop up on Aurora Avenue called Surreal Espresso, and a guy named Bob Rivers and Sean Donahue had come to town. They hadn't even gone on the air yet. They'd come here from Baltimore, and they were coming to the coffee shop because my friend Michael McMorrow, who I went to college with, was their first producer in bringing them.
Mm.
So I told Sean very excitedly, I said, "I signed up for radio school." And he said, "You did what?" And I said, "I signed up for this national broadcasting school." He goes, "Dude, I can't believe you did that. That is way too much money." He goes, "I guess we're going to have to make you an intern." So I started as
Dang.
their intern at KISW, January 2nd, 1990. I'll still never forget that day. And I wound up working with Bob for 25 years. I went from
Wow.
intern to co-host, and I have a really weird radio story because a lot of people go from town to town, and you start in Yakima or somewhere and you work your way to a bigger market. I got to essentially broadcast in my home in Seattle
Wow.
pretty much my whole career. I mean, we spent a little time syndicated into other cities and stuff, but for the most part, I worked with the same people. We switched stations a little so we could
Mm.
get a raise here and there, but got to stay where I love, the city of Seattle, and do that for 25 years.
So break down for people who haven't heard of that radio station. What were the topics you guys would cover? What was it
So
based around?
our show it was the Bob Rivers Show with Bob, Spike, and Joe, and we started at KISW for 10 years.
Mm.
Then we were on KZOK for 10 years, and then we were on KJR FM, which is now it's called the Jet. In fact, they started the Jet the day we left. It
Mhm.
was KJR FM, and we had a variety show. We did, and it evolved. I mean, in 1990, it sounded a lot different than it did in 2010 or in 2000. But we mostly did a talk show, variety show, lots of guests. We'd have a couple or three guests a day. Comedy, if you were going to put one word on it, we tried to be funny. I mean, that was our premise.
Yeah.
We did a lot of song parodies for Atlantic Records, Twisted Christmas, and a lot of songs. And actually, I'm very proud. We're put into the Radio Hall of Fame in 2023, this last class.
Yes.
Yeah, the Bob Rivers Show. Now, this is mostly Bob. Bob had a great career before I even met him. He was in Boston and Baltimore.
Is he older than you, or?
Yeah, he's a
Okay.
little bit older. But it was very nice of Bob because when the Radio Hall of Fame induction, he insisted on it being the Bob Rivers Show on the trophy, and we all went to New York.
Wow.
And while Bob made the speech, he had us all stand up and take a bow. And I thought that was really good because not too many people in Seattle market. We're not small market, but we're not New York and LA. I mean, the other people in there are Shadow Stevens and all these guys that were big syndicated names.
Mhm.
So I like to think we were a show that was edgy yet family oriented. We were something. One of our bosses, Lisa Decker, said our show was sticky. That once you listen, kind of like flypaper, I guess,
Okay.
you kind of stick,
Yeah.
and that's the whole purpose of a good morning radio show, is to get you to keep that dial in one place, and then it will stick there for the rest of the day, and it will still be there when you get in the car the next morning.
Mhm.
And that was kind of our mission. We were three guys with families. I didn't have a family in the beginning, but that's the other part. We raised our family on the radio. My daughter Emily was essentially born on the air. The first thing I did after she was born was get out there and make a call into the station to let everybody know that she had arrived. And so that's kind of it was a unconventional show. It's hard to put a label on it, but I would say comedy, variety, and real community oriented.
What would you say like your job was on the show? I recently had Jose from 92.5, and I think he's the third mic,
Mm-hmm.
and his job is kind of to be like the reaction laughy guy.
Right.
What would you say your job
Well, I was that guy for a lot of the time. I didn't start as that guy. I was a producer. Well, I was an intern. And then they called me Downtown Joe because the first thing they had me doing was doing street stuff. I would go out to a different downtown every day, and we'd do a bit called phone booth trivia. There aren't even phone booths now. You couldn't do this. But I would call in from a phone booth, and I would say, I'm sitting here in Fife, right across the street from the city jail. First person who comes here gets to play phone booth trivia. And then the answer would always be C. So everybody knew that listened to us regularly, the answer was C. And I would write the questions, and, C was always the joke answer, and we would try to write some jokes with this. But that's the way I started, was producer and street team. I was booking the guests. I was answering the request lines and putting, the callers on the air. And Buzz Anderson, a great guy, he was an engineer at KISW. He said, when you're sitting back there, because I was at a desk most of the time, you laugh. It's pretty funny. You got a pretty funny laugh. He goes, I'm going to put a microphone. So you'll have a microphone just in case you want to come. And I got to thank Buzz maybe for me being a co-host eventually, because Buzz put a microphone in. Yeah. So then Bob could call me up. I never had a place to sit or anything, but he could call me up and say, Joe, what are you working on? I could report and stuff. And then I was told I had a pretty good laugh. It was like Barney Rubble. I don't know if you've seen the Flintstones.
Yeah.
Everybody thought, oh, he sounds like Barney Rubble. It's so cute. So then they wanted me on the mic the whole time. And then I got too busy to be driving around to phone booths.
Yeah.
And then eventually.
Wait, for the phone booth real quick, like people would actually show up?
Oh, yeah. I don't think you could do this now, because it was sometimes, if the prize was big enough, it could be dangerous. Like, we're giving away a VCR, which back in those days, VCR was a big deal. All of a sudden, you hear trucks come screaming in. It's like a little bit of a liability, probably, just to have people racing to you to get to you.
There was something about that, though, like the real organic interaction with that, though.
Oh, yeah.
Like building a podcast. Like, I've been doing this for 4 years now, and like there's some interviews that hit and they get thousands of views, and there's still some that are in the tens of views. It just really depends on like what we're talking about and who the guest is, right? So it's interesting, and like everyone can be their own radio host, their own artist, their own influencer, but to have that like real actual like interaction with people, there's something with that's missing now. And then like people have told me to like even go on the street and do things, right? So that goes back to like what we were originally talking about with like the more things change, the more they stay the same, with like how there's podcast networks just like there's radio networks, etc.
Yeah, and there's a ton of great bits out there in the street. There's a little bit of danger too, but Jay Leno has his jaywalking, or did, and he's retired now. And just like you're saying, some things hit, some things don't. If I went out, and I'd drive to Arlington. I would drive way out in the sticks. And when I called in from Arlington or Yelm or somewhere, half the city would come. I mean, it was a party. When I called in from where we are in downtown Seattle, Pioneer Square or something, I could be sitting there. They'd play 2 songs. Still nobody's come because Seattle people are too busy and too cool to go see some guy at a phone booth. So that bit was kind of hit and miss too. And the further I went, it seemed like the more excited people were to see me. And that's kind of KISW in general. It's a suburb. And still is to this day, I assume, the wide tires, it's the south end, it's the north end more than, downtown.
Got it.
Thing.
Okay. So then you started doing that, and then you got promoted to becoming the third mic, right? There's only ever been 3 people on that show.
Well, no, we've had a lot of people on the show over the years. We always had 3 people, and then we had a news person. Okay. And the first news person that was my biggest mentor, Bob Rivers, and Jim Campman was his name, and he taught at Green River College for a long time. Campy's passed on, but what an amazing talent, and he taught me so much. In fact, he married me. He officiated my wedding, I should say. But I was the third mic, and then we've had different great news people. Casey Aitchison, who was went on to TV at Q13. Jody Brothers, who's still on the air
Mm,
now, still where we left her at nine. Or actually, I think yeah, she's still at 95.7 there. Maura Gallucci. But the way my evolution went was I was the third mic, but I was still the producer.
mm,
And I was making promos after the show every day. I was booking the guests. I was doing everything. And I was working myself into the ground. And I didn't mind.
mm,
But one day I told Bob, he kind of got on me for not having something prepared, or I said something that wasn't what he wanted said.
mm,
And I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, I'm starting to listen to the show now as a producer. I'm looking for the promo. I'm already thinking about what do I have to do after work, and
mm.
I'm thinking in edit points and stuff. And he goes, well, I don't want you thinking that way. I just want you thinking creative and being funny. So we got to figure this out. So then we hired a producer, and
Mm.
I became co-host. And then by the way, producer for at least back in those days in radio language was not very well. It was the definition of producer is low pay. I mean,
Right.
when you get to co-host and they go, "Oh, you're talent." Then
Yeah.
I started getting the cat food commercials and the casino deals and all
Yeah.
that, because then I was talent. As a producer, you don't get that stuff.
Dang.
So then that was in the I guess mid 90s. I became the co-host, and then so for 20 of the 25 years, I was kind of the third banana. But like you said with Jose,
Mm.
I was third. Bob and Spike could do the majority of the talking, and I would sit back and wait for my moment. And usually it's a moment to shine when they needed either a punchline, or they needed some kind of observation after they've mined through a topic and they've said about all they can say. I could bring in a fresh perspective and then keep it rolling a little bit.
Do you ever think about like, was it like the universe telling you to be a radio host, or do you think it was just luck, or like, what do you think it was? Just
I think it was doing what you're doing, Blake. Thinking about what do I like, and where do I want to hang out, and,
mm,
and what do I want to do. I didn't think I wanted to be a radio host, and going back to where I met Bob was at this espresso shop called Surreal Espresso. And the reason I liked working there was because it was a kind of a throwback shop even at that time.
mm,
And we sponsored the Grateful Dead Hour on KZOK. That was a whole nother story. Is my boss, Keith, who was just amazing. He told them, well, we'll sponsor it, but I want my barista to do the commercials. He used to do radio in high school. If you'll let him do the commercials,
wow.
I'll write the checks. And so I was hanging out with Keith up at the espresso shop. We were doing the Grateful Dead Hour, and then I met Bob, and one thing led to another, and that's where I tell a lot of students and a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know. I said, well, if you don't know, get in a place where you're going to meet a lot of people, because
Mm,
maybe this isn't your dream job, but maybe the person you meet might be the person that points you in the direction of your dreams.
yes.
So I knew I liked music. I liked hanging out. I liked talking to people. I wasn't big on alcohol.
Mm,
I liked coffee. So this was like, okay, I'm hanging out at a coffee shop. I'm getting to listen to the music I want. We had a dartboard. I'm playing darts. I'm
mm,
getting paid to do this stuff. And then lo and behold, Bob comes along, and I'm doing both. Then I'm going to school at National Broadcasting. I'm doing an internship. I'm working at the coffee shop, and one thing led to another, and then I wound up getting a career out of it. But it wasn't something I set out to.
right.
But I don't, and I've had people say, "Well, you got lucky." Well, yeah, I guess I did. Lucky enough to meet somebody who would point me in the right direction.
Mm,
But what we built, Bob would say he got lucky by meeting me and by meeting Spike.
yeah.
When you become a group of collaborators like that, we all got lucky by knowing each other.